Life doesn't stop while on vacation. Neither do medical issues, accidents, or worse. We are going to ask the questions others won't, so you can protect yourself and your family.
Hey everybody, my name is John Shallow with Cruise Addicts, and I'm here with Tom Scolaro of Scolaro Law. And today we're actually going to talk about when you're injured on board. Here's why it's not simple when suing the cruise lines. You think it might be simple. You know, something happens on board. You think they're liable. You call a lawyer like Tom, and we're going to find out today that it's actually not so simple. So we're going to get Tom in here. Hey Tom, how are you today?
I'm doing great. Good afternoon. Thanks for having me, John.
Yeah. And, you know, we were just talking about this before we went live. It's not so simple when a client calls you up and says, you know, something particular happened on board. The client thinks something that, you know, the cruise line's obviously liable, right? And you have to take those calls, right?
Yeah. Well, the calls usually go something like that. It's a variety of that. Normally, you know, somebody will call up and, you know, take a fall, for example, or something like that. Well, I slipped and fell on the Lido deck and you know, broke my leg in 3 different places. I had to be airlifted off and I need surgery, and you know, the cruise ship is responsible, so you know, they should pay. And you know, when I don't immediately jump out of my chair thinking, oh, wow, I can help this person, and I start peppering them with more questions, you know, they get a little perplexing look on my face, like, why is he asking me all these detailed questions? Well, I ask those detailed questions for a reason, because there's a whole lot that you need to go through and prove before you can win a case. And look, let's take you for example, John. Imagine I'm at your house for a barbecue, right? And I take a spill in the back, you know, in the barbecue area. I fell at John's house. You know, he should be responsible. Well, not really. You know, John is responsible, or the host or the cruise line is responsible if they were negligent. Cruise ships are not insurers of people's safety, but they are responsible for harm or for injury if they are negligent. And okay, so that's not a fancy term, a pretty understandable term. What does negligence mean? Negligence is the failure to use reasonable care under the circumstances. So I tell people all the time, I said, just because something bad happened to you on board doesn't mean you automatically win. We need to prove it, okay? Because as the individual, the entity filing a lawsuit, you know, if we just said the accident happened on, you know, the first day, and it was a puddle of water, and I fell and broke my hip, with nothing else, that case gets thrown out. We have to prove that there was active negligence, that they knew about it, that they should have known about it, that they created it. And that's just, you know, for example, on something like falls. So I get it. People, you know, think, well, it happened there, they should be responsible. And in theory, I agree with you. but the law is a little bit more challenging than that. And that's why it's obviously important to get with someone who is well versed in maritime law in particular, because this is a particular niche body of law that has its own well-developed case law on it. And so it's not like a land-based event where you can just, you know, rely on a lot of the circumstances. There's a lot more that has to be met, and a lot of hurdles that have to jump.
You know, yeah, and that's a good point, because I wanted to tell the audience that a lot of the new viewers that might be, and even listeners that on the podcast version, I want to let them know about, you know, give you a proper intro and let them know that we actually started. This is a second series in a series, and where the first one was, we talked about some of those detailed things in the passenger contract, and how the way you bring a case, and how there's many different things, and how it's very unique in a maritime situation, right?
Yeah, exactly. So that's one of the other sort of starting points is, I guess the first thing I say is, don't sleep on your rights, because if you take a long enough nap on your rights, when you wake up, they're gone.
Yeah.
You know, that's the way I sort of make it. And you know, every case, everything has what we call a statute of limitations, meaning if you don't file your case by a certain period of time, you can have the world's greatest case. They can tell you they're at fault, whatever. But if you literally do not, provide them with the correct notice within the first 6 months, and then follow that up by filing your lawsuit within a year of the event, you can have the greatest case in the world and the most meritorious case in the world. But if you file it in the court system 1 year and 1 day late or a day late, the case is gone. And it's, we touched on this a little bit in our first discussion, is that unfortunately there's a lot of lawyers out there who, think that they can resolve or handle a maritime case, and they could be from, Pennsylvania or Virginia or wherever their client is, and think, well, I could just, call the cruise line company and try and resolve it and settle it. What they're doing with you in that situation is they're just, stringing you along. Unfortunately, I can't fault them for that. I'm a competitive guy, and if I were them, I would do the same thing. You string them along. That's not cheating. That's not unfair. They're just taking advantage of somebody who doesn't know any better.
It's got to run on the clock now, right?
Exactly. So, always best to understand and make sure that you're dealing with somebody who has a broad breadth of experience with maritime law, that knows these things. Because, look, that's the low-hanging fruit. But you'd be surprised. I've had to have many a phone call with people who called us too late, or lawyers who call us, yeah, I've been talking to, so-and-so cruise line, we're close to getting it resolved. I wanted to bring it here in Connecticut, but, I now see the contract says gotta be in Florida. I say, remind me, when was the date of the incident again? Oh, about 14 months ago. Okay, this is going to be a different type of conversation.
Yeah, you said, so that's really, really the hard part about it too, is these people obviously had something, for everything from A to Z can happen, right? And then they think something's being done. Even the attorneys, right? These that aren't versed in this as you are, that handle these cases. They think it's going on a good course, and then they call you and they realize they've missed the boat, literally, right?
Yeah, and that's that's the danger. Lawyers, sometimes bite off more than they can chew, and they may think that that because they've had success in a different area of law, that's the same skill set, so I could just apply it to this. They may be the greatest, car accident attorney or whatever. Well, it's still an accident, or the greatest slip and fall type lawyer in Delaware, but it's a different body of law. It's like I don't pretend to play in any other sandbox. I'm a Florida-based injury lawyer, and so I do not handle patents. I don't do criminal law. I don't do real estate. You don't want to, as they say, get out in front of your skis on certain types of cases. Yeah.
And with that note, I actually wanted to give the audience, because we're reaching new people every week, I want to make sure they know who they're listening to here and who they're meeting. And the purpose of this is, obviously, we've got Tom here from Scolaro Law. He's going to actually tell our audience, cruise addicts out there, exactly what your rights are. It's unfortunate, but if something does happen, we hope it doesn't, but if it does happen, we want to make sure that you can be in touch with someone like Tom to give you the information and have the facts, that if you have to take a case, you can actually do it properly and within the right times, and all these little things that we're going to talk about. But getting back to Tom, I want to give him a proper intro here. Tom's legal career spans over 25 years, and he is the founding partner of Scolaro Law in Miami, like he said, which specializes in personal injury and has handled many high-profile cruise cases and maritime cases. And it's really impressive. Tom's reputation extends beyond the courtroom also. He has been recognized by esteemed publications such as Best Lawyers in America and Florida Super Lawyers, reflecting his standing in the legal community. He actually has a cape, but to most, a cruise ship is a floating resort. To Tom, it's a jurisdictional puzzle, a liability minefield, and often a trap for the unprepared, like we were just talking about. For his entire career, Tom and his team have been pulling back the curtain on cruise lines. He's gone up against the biggest names in the industry, and won cases that weren't supposed to be winnable. The kind of cases where injuries are horrific, the law is obscure and anti-consumer, and the companies are betting the victim won't fight back. And, that's law, right? It's a competition, it's a chess match. Just like you said a minute ago, you have even attorneys that are really, really gifted in their own arena, don't really know what they're getting into as far as the maritime and cruise world, right?
Exactly. And again, I don't fault the cruise lines or the corporations for having the mindset that they do, right? So they're going to try and, market and advertise the world's greatest experience on the front end. And if things go bad, well, it becomes about protecting the brand, and it becomes about denying liability. And because with liability comes payment. And so if they're a corporation, they're a business, they've got an obligation to shareholders to minimize that line on the ledger where they are paying claims. And so, there is no real concept of good corporate citizenry. This is a competitive arena. It's you, me, versus them when it comes time to claims. You are no longer a guest that they want to remarket to or repackage to or try and have you have a lifetime of great cruises and experiences. No, when you bring a claim, what's that show, Shark Tank, where Mr. Wonderful, you're dead to me, right? That's what it is. Well, you want to enforce your own rights. You want to hold us accountable for what we did wrong. You're dead to me, right?
Wow.
That's the mindset, other than because they are all about protecting themselves. And again, there's nothing wrong with it, but you can't go about this life, this world with rose-colored glasses, right? Have a great experience on a cruise, enjoy the vacation. But if something does go wrong, understand that it's now an adversarial system. They will not admit they did anything wrong, even when they did. They will not. They will fight you every step of the way to try and prevent you from getting the compensation that you and your family deserve. That is just the DNA of a corporation, and you can't take it personally. I don't. You just make sure you hire yourself a damn good lawyer. A lawyer who knows what they're doing, understands, what it takes to fight, enjoys the fight, has the resources to fight, has the knowledge to fight, and whose heart aligns with you, with the consumer. And there's people out there like me. I'll volunteer myself right now, that do this and who care and who are on the consumer side. Because look, the deck is stacked against you. They put these limitations on you. They put the choice of law on you. They put the venue on you. They've got the most high-power law firms in the state against you, and you've got to be up for the challenge, because they can spend you into oblivion. They can make it more narrow, more restricted. You just got to be, I think, somebody who's taken one too many kicks to the head and enjoys, a good fight, a good old-fashioned throwdown like I do.
It really is like a chess match too, and a fight and challenging to navigate all those things. The first thing that jumps to mind is, and I wanted to ask you, is because these ships are obviously international waters, it could be, either something might have happened in a port, but either way, they have control of that venue. It's not like, it's not like we have cameras on a house across the street or something like that, or any kind of evidence that you can get. They really control the whole thing, don't they?
They do, and they've set it up deliberately this way. So, I'm sure you've got members of your audience from all over the country: Texas, Pennsylvania, Delaware, New York. It doesn't matter. If somebody gets hurt or wants to bring a claim for something that happened to them, 9 times out of 10, the law of your state where this occurred is going to control. Maybe 99 out of 100 times, the law of the state where this occurred is going to control. So you bring up a good point. When you're in international waters, what law controls? Well, there is a now developed body of maritime law over the years, and maritime law controls. But they have set it up in such a way where you can't file your lawsuit in Texas, even though you're from Texas and your doctors are in Texas and you lost wages in Texas, where you could on any other case. Now, whenever you sue a cruise line, you have to comply with where they want you to file suit. You've already contractually, you don't even know it, given up that right when you purchase the contract. I don't know how many pages these contracts are up to these days, these passenger ticket contracts, but buried within there is a venue provision which says where the case has to be filed. And the vast majority of the cruise lines have selected Florida, in particular the Southern District of Florida, where I practice out of, to have their cases brought. And that would be cases against Carnival or NCL or Royal Caribbean or MSC, and even now Princess. Princess was previously had a requirement that their cases, if you're going to file against them, that all cases had to be filed in federal district court in Los Angeles. Okay. Holland America requires that their cases be filed in the the Western District of the state of Washington. So those are really generally the three venues, and Disney will have the Middle District of Florida. That's still Florida, but it's all spelled out in the contract. Now, one pretty, I'm going to call it nefarious thing that they've done is if you are from the EU or Canada or South Africa or South America, wherever, doesn't matter, anywhere but the US, and you book a cruise through some click wrap thing, chances are you've got a different type of contract. They will say in those instances, if you're from the UK or wherever, or Canada, that suit, because you are not a U.S. citizen, didn't book it in the U.S., that case needs to be filed in the courts of England and Wales. And you say, well, why do they do that? That doesn't make a lot of sense. Well, you got to think about it from their perspective. How best can they save money? By going to England and Wales, because that country is a signatory to the Athens Convention. And the Athens Convention contains a absolute cap, an absolute ceiling on their liability exposure, which is something called special drawing rights. It's not a lot of money, okay? For a catastrophic loss or the loss of a loved one, it's a arbitrarily low bar. If your cruise, if you book through, even if you're an American citizen and you book a cruise that does not touch a U.S. port, okay, doesn't touch a U.S. port, you don't leave from Port Canaveral, Port Everglades, or Port of Miami, you leave from some other port out of the U.S. Those cases will also be subject to the Athens Convention. They will take the situs of your case and say the choice of venue for those cases are at a different location. And so again, they do that all to limit or lower its liability. Can't complain about it. That's just the way the law is, and you got to do your best to fight it. And occasionally, and I mean this, exceptionally rare times where you can have enough facts to get around that. I've looked at, I don't know, probably over a dozen and a half cases that had those particular issues, and I only took one case on that I felt I was able to get around it. And that's because it involved a minor child, and the minor child was not a signatory to anything. The minor child did not purchase the contract. It was purchased on her behalf, and so the law gave me a little leeway with that, and I used it to best position our client for a favorable resolution. But all that to say, they control with what happens. You've just got to understand the venue in which you're playing with, and try and get somebody who knows what they're doing around it.
And you talked about notice requirements. I know we've got here the 6-month notice trap. And what does that entail?
So that means it's pretty simple. You just have to, and it could be done by yourself. You don't need a lawyer for this. You just have to provide them written notice of the particulars of your claim. That my name is, Joe Smith. I was on the, blankety blank vessel on blankety blank date, and I sustained an injury to my blankety blank. Pretty basic, just to quote, put them on notice, because it's another thing that they throw in there. And if you don't, again, they can make a very good argument that your case is barred and does not get to proceed with litigation, because they'll claim unfair surprise. They were not given notice to try and resolve it, et cetera, et cetera. But that's just one of the things that they do.
So it's just another one of these hurdles as far as the venue, the type of cruise, where it left from all these little variables in the passenger contract that the average consumer wouldn't think about. But like we said, luckily things don't happen, that often. But when they do, and even these catastrophic cases that you've dealt with, all these things add up to make it much more difficult, right?
Yeah, but you'd be surprised, John. I mean, it's almost like, look, think of the number of cruise ships that are operating, and you would know this more than I would. I haven't looked at the stats on it. If you look at the number of cruise ships that are sailing with the number of occupancy of each vessel and the schedule that they are, you are talking about moving millions of people throughout the course of a year. And okay, you don't think anything bad's going to happen, but just do the numbers. Millions of people with tight enclosures, water all around, a different environment, crew members who are not from this country. It's a recipe for things to go wrong. They don't always do it, of course not, but it happens with enough frequency and regularity that people like me have had to sort of have a niche practice where I don't only do this stuff, but it is a bulk of what I do, the cruise ship stuff. And I'm only one of, there's a few other players here in Miami who do this stuff like me, and there's others that dabble in it. But it's enough where it keeps us busy. And look, I think it's, August 31st, Royal Caribbean is, the Star of the Seas is now setting sail.
Yeah.
It'll be the largest ship out there with a capacity, I believe, to hold 5,600 guests, if my numbers are right, and probably, I don't know what in crew, probably half that or something like that.
2,000 crew, yeah. So I think it's rolling at 7,000.
You got 7,000 people together for a week. All sorts of, I don't have to guess. I can tell you from experience the type of things that can go wrong. From your walking environment, right? Making sure the areas you're walking over are safe, to the parts of the ship that you interact with, that nothing's going to hurt you, to, foodborne illnesses. Just this week, I was retained on a very significant case involving a salmonella outbreak aboard one of the cruise ships that will remain nameless. But a client has just sustained massive, injuries and treatment as a result of this. Just so sad. And it was an outbreak that happened on a ship, that people were out to have a good time. There's issues with the medical care. Let's assume people that, just because you go out on a cruise doesn't mean that your own biological clock stops ticking, right? So, there's going to be cardiac events. There's going to be stroke events. There's going to be acute events. And you're not dealing with the Cleveland Clinic out there at sea, okay? You're dealing with, they are doctors, but I wouldn't exactly call them, what we look for here, board certified university, level medical care. I've had a number of cases like that, and God forbid you need to get off the vessel, right? You think you're one of 5,000 passengers. You think they're going to turn the vessel around for you? You think they're going to make a diversion for you? I mean, that's our ego. Talk like, well, they have to, right? I'm suffering a medical emergency. I need to. They know they should, but a lot of times they don't. Now, there are occasions where they have successfully diverted a ship, or sped up a ship, or called the Coast Guard to get somebody off. But the amount of times that they should do it in relation to the amount of times that they do it, that's not a good batting average, as they say. And so there's issues with excursions, for example, right? So, boy, a cruise ship is all right. Half the fun is on the cruise ship, half the fun is off the cruise ship. You know this, John. Is like,
Yeah.
There's all sorts of great excursions. There's parasailing, there's zip lining, there's tours, there's snorkeling. You name it, they have it. Again, great. But guess what? This gets into our topic I really want to touch on is, if something happens to you on one of these excursions, the law has developed in such a way where without more, cruise ship can't be held liable for that without more. So let's assume, you go on an excursion, pick your excursion, doesn't matter. And the excursion company drives off a cliff, or, their drivers, 3 sheets to the wind and head on into somebody. You do not get to sue the cruise line for that, even though you may have booked it, through them. They may have, vouched for them in some manner. You may have thought that you were getting it, that it was sort of operated by them. The way the law has developed is, and because the cruise line puts into any contract that you purchase for an excursion, you should do this experiment one day, John, on your next cruise. Purchase an excursion, and then look at the fine print on that ticket. It will say not operated by blank cruise line. It'll be, this is offered, by an independent contractor, Blake. And so what does that magic term independent contractor mean? It means cruise ship isn't at fault, or cruise ship is not liable or responsible, even though you didn't select that excursion on your own. You didn't do your own homework on them. You're like, the cruise ship, they got a contract with the cruise ship. I'm doing it through the cruise line. Oh boy, yeah, that's where that's a big issue in this arena. You would have to have, again, and I've done this, and we actually have a case right now. I won't bore you with the details. The most tragic case you could probably imagine, where they're blaming, no, it's not us, it's an independent contractor. So we have to establish what's called a parent agency, meaning that forget about what the actual language of the contract or the ticket says. By all other conduct, all other actions, it sure as heck looks like, this was run through the cruise line, or that the cruise line had control, right? And that they did things at the cruise line's direction. So if you can establish those elements of control, evidence of a parent agency, then you will have a I'll call a puncher's chance at holding the cruise line responsible for that. Now, why is that important? Why do you want to hold the cruise line responsible and not, well, if it's the excursion company's fault, just sue the excursion company? Not exactly. And here's the problem with that. Because in order to sue the excursion companies, right, you in a court here in the U.S. or Florida, courts have to have jurisdiction over them. Okay, Tom, stop using fancy lawyer words. What does jurisdiction mean? Good question. So jurisdiction means that the court has inherent authority or power to haul them into court and to adjudicate an issue. And how does one get jurisdiction over a entity? Well, if you do business in the state of Florida, if you live in the state of Florida, if you solicit in Florida, if you are involved, if you've incorporated here, or some some minimal contacts with the state of Florida. But, all of these, not all, but the vast majority of these excursion companies, they're not set up in Florida. They barely find Florida on a map. They don't advertise here. There's no advertising because the cruise line does it for them. They're incorporated in the Bahamas or, Jamaica or, pick your tropical island. So you can't sue them here because you can't get jurisdiction on them here in large part. Again, a skilled lawyer will be able to do enough with jurisdictional discovery to make a colorable argument to get them here. But the better way to do it would be to get it through the cruise line. So think of how this is set up, right? If you get hurt on excursion, you get blasted, whatever excursion it is, doesn't matter. Let's assume somebody is snorkeling and, they don't give you any of the riptide warnings or something that day. And you're pulled out into the ocean, drown, die, whatever, sad as that may be. Think of your hurdles now. You generally, you want to sue the tour operator. Okay, how do you get them here in Florida, right? How do you hold them responsible here? Because if you try and sue them in Bahamas, they'll laugh at you. The laws over there laugh at you, because they don't have a system like we do. And then you want to, all right, well, if I can't get jurisdiction over there, I got the cruise line. Oh no, because we've told you in our contract that they're independent contractors.
It's almost like a legal dead end, right?
Oh, that's how it is set up, right? And it makes no sense because they were negligent, reckless, pick your adjective, but the law may not afford you a remedy, right? Unless you got to get with somebody who knows what the heck they're doing. And even in those situations, it's tough to do. So I don't want to complain about it because it is what it is, but I also don't want to give your audience the false impression that, well, just because, if something bad happens to me, I can just always sue them. Yeah, it's a little bit more complicated than that, as I'm letting you in on.
Yeah, and it's like you just said. These are doctors. The doctors are independent contractors too, right? I mean, a lot of the
that's all right. So let me address that one point. The doctors were independent contractors for 20 years until finally there was a 11th Circuit opinion in Barbetta where the court finally said, this is all a sham, right? They're your doctors. You pay them. They're wearing your coats. They were using your medical equipment. They're in your facilities. They're your employees. So previously, those were bad cases. Couldn't take them because what are you going to do? Sue an uninsured doctor who is from the Philippines, right? No, but nowadays, and that's actually a large part of my practice, is suing the cruise lines for medical malpractice that occurs on board, whether that be in the form of a misdiagnosis or failure to treat, or both in conjunction with a failure to medevac that person off the vessel. And we see this a lot in sort of what I would call like cases of real life threatening emergencies, like somebody has a GI bleed or has some sort of is getting sort of septic, or they have a cardiac event or a stroke. So those are all medical emergencies that are time sensitive and require a higher level of care and skill that can be provided for on the vessel. So in those instances, I've seen it way too many times where they just stabilize the patient, quote, monitor the blood pressure, give fluids, but meanwhile there's nothing done to evacuate the stroke or to break up the clot, or God forbid somebody's having a hemorrhagic stroke, which I've seen as well, to stop the bleed, cauterize it. You see all sorts of things like that, and there's just no call to action by the staff. It's almost like you're getting palliative care on board. And then as soon as they get to a port, they get you off the boat at that point, and you're somebody else's problem. But really what should happen is they should help effectuate the evacuation, before another 8 hours to this port or another 14 hours to that port. Because in a lot of cases, time is brain, and if you don't break up the clot in time, you end up with permanent brain injury. And so, people need to know that when they're going aboard a cruise, while it may have a medical facility, John, it is not the same community medical facility that they're familiar with in their local hospital. For example, there's no CAT scans on board a cruise ship. They have a rudimentary X-rays. There's no MRIs. There's no CAT scans. So they can try and do a clinical diagnosis, but you will never get a true deep eliminating type of diagnosis because they don't have the diagnostic equipment on board. And there's a whole bunch of acute medical situations that arise that need immediate imaging. And so, and cruise lines are not going to retrofit or put on these CAT scans. They're just not, even though there are now portable CT scanners, right? I had a case, we'll call it 2+ years ago, where it was obvious to everybody under the sun that this particular gentleman was having an ischemic stroke, not a hemorrhagic stroke. And they have the TPA medication that can bust up the clot. And if they give it to you within the 3.5 hour window, you're generally going to be okay. You're not going to have any residual complications. But the standard of care in the medical community is you cannot give that medication without having done a CT scan first. And so, I made the argument that, look, they're putting portable CT scanners in the back of ambulances in certain places. These things have the technology is getting so good, and much more affordable. Why wouldn't you, right?
Right.
Well, I can tell you the answer. The answer is because if they know you're having some sort of an acute medical event that they can diagnose and they can't treat it on board and it can get treated timely off the vessel, that means they'd have to, divert the vessel or get you evacuated off there. And a lot of times there's financial reasons for not wanting to do that, obviously.
So you're saying for them, ignorance is bliss.
I couldn't have said it better myself, and I don't know if it's ignorance. I think there's deliberate ignorance is bliss.
Right. That's what I'm saying. Like, we don't know nothing. We don't see nothing. Like,
that's more like, sticking the ostrich that sticks its head in the sand, right? Just doesn't want to
know nothing. Yeah. We don't know anything. We can't treat anything. Right.
Yeah. So there's that component to this. And again, just being is informed is being forewarned, right? So you just want to be informed because, okay, if I were to go on a cruise line a cruise vessel these days, I would make sure I have all sorts of that I've got my contact to my shoreside doctor in case something comes up, but that I've also purchased and we touched on this last time, the insurance to get yourself evacuated if need be, or somehow back to shore. You can do things to protect yourself, and I always sort of recommend that.
What I was thinking, because we were kind of touched on it, and you talked about it. Why the ships are getting bigger. We've got 7,000 people, including the crew in some cases. All the ships. When I first started cruising, it was maybe 800 people on a ship, and that was a lot of people at the time. And now, of course, everything's getting bigger, and they're actually getting rid of the smaller ships because they call it the economies of scale. It's more profitable to have these big ships, one engine, one captain, one doctor, so on and so forth. Do you think there'll be some political pressure and potentially, obviously, legal pressure from these cases? Because Of course, as you have more people, the multiples of everything, more sick people, more injuries, more problems, potentially, more of these situations that you've talked about that happen. Because if you got 3, 4, 5 times the amount of the people on one ship, then those incidences are going to be the same as well, because it's a numbers thing too, right? Things happen.
It is. So that's a great thought, John. And I was that naive once too, where I thought that the government would actually, look at issues like this or whatever and protect the consumer. But the longer I am alive, the more I have come to understand, those who lobby and those with the most bucks win. So in terms of, will there be any real reform, any real regulatory oversight, or any reversal of any of these bad bodies of law? I don't see that. Absent it happening to one of the lawmakers themselves,
Senator,
or absent a Titanic type of episode where
love that.
it's I mean you would need the most catastrophic of catastrophic events to occur where there could be then viral outrage. So absent viral outrage on a mass scale, we're just one voice, and we don't donate enough to the correct political action committees to matter. We are, unfortunately, again, you're left to play in a system, but you're left to play in a system with a lawyer, and that's the important part. Is okay. We can't complain and whine about it all the time. You have to fight in the arena in which you exist. And okay, it's an uphill battle. It's like, rolling, I forget my Greek mythology, whatever it is, but you're rolling that stone up the hill. Okay. Yeah. But you can get there. Okay. If you've got the right legal team with the right experience, you can get there. But it's certainly not going to be what I would call any other type of case, like an automobile accident, right? You just file a lawsuit against the person who hit you, and the insurance company pays, or it's very different. This is a well-organized lobby, and you're talking about billion-dollar, multi-billion-dollar corporations, and it's just the way the cookie crumbles right now.
And there's no incentive, because I'm just sitting here listening and just thinking as well. There's no incentive right now, for many reasons, like you said earlier, to put like a trauma level or even like a basic emergency room, in the cruise lines with a CT, portable CT, like you said, with these basic things where they could do maybe a small surgical suite of sorts, where they can do some of these things we talked about if they have a stroke, things like that.
So I would posit this. I think as these cruise ships get bigger, right, everything else on the ship is getting bigger and more advanced and more state of the art, except the medical facility. Right?
We may have talked about this. I remember the days when they would really, flaunt this. We have a video, direct to the Cleveland Clinic, and we can have the best medical people in the world literally beam right into the doctor on board 24/7, and they can get those care almost like a remote. You could bring the best there, right? To get the treatment. But that was a long time ago, and like I said, things are changing rapidly.
Eventually, everybody's going to catch up with everybody on the size of the ships. Everybody's going to have the same size of water slide or the same number of buffets or off. Then you're going to get a point to a point where, okay, so where can we add value? Where can we be a real differentiator for our, customer? And you're going to start to see, and we're not there yet, but hopefully my hope is that at some point you will see a real clamoring of that to, well, let's order, let's have better medical services and better suites, something like that. I think that that will eventually happen. We're just not there yet because people are still competing on water slides and the size of their, buffets and the number of bars they have, or the shows, the entertainment. But the longer people live, and we are increasing in that, the more there's going to be a demand. And this is the law of supply and demand, where they don't really cater to, 80-year-olds or 90-year-olds, 50, 60, 70s. But what happens when we start living longer, into our 80s or our 90s? Well, those folks are going to want things that speak to their longevity, things that speak to, what happens if you want me to take a week cruise with you and pay you X dollars? Fine. But I need to know that if something happens to me during that week I'm on the Atlantic Ocean with you, that you got this covered. And so I think you'll eventually see that, but I don't think we're there yet, because they are still competing for the lower common denominator, by entertainment and attractions. Eventually, though, I'm hopeful that they'll get there.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for that. Yeah. And so we also wanted to talk about maritime law's approach to negligence and duty. And what does that actually mean?
So I'll sum it up this way. Let's use you're the guinea pig today, John. We'll use you as an example. So we have a barbecue at your place. You invite over 8 of your friends, and you spilled beer or something on the ground, and somebody takes a flyer into it, and they go up, they go down, they break 3 bones in their leg. Seems to me you'd be responsible for that, because you spilled the beer, and you knew about it, and you didn't clean it up. Okay, so you've got a duty to your guests at that point to remove known hazards or hazards that you create. All right. Now, in the maritime world, let's assume they create the condition. They do the risk-creating event. Strange as it may seem, there's not liability for that unless they know or should have known that it was a dangerous condition, meaning they're mopping the floor, but they people would think it's a wet floor, okay, people could slip, but unless somebody previously slipped on a wet floor like that, or they knew it was wet and didn't put up a sign, then there's no liability for that. So the other example I will give you, so this just happened to me in a case recently where there was a spill at one of the refreshment stands someplace, and a guest was going through the buffet line and slipped and fell when it came to the refreshments, went down like a ton of bricks, she broke her hip, if memory serves me right. And I said, all right, and this was caught on the camera. All right, well, that happened. I could see it all. But you don't win that case unless you can prove that the spill that was on the ground was there for a substantial enough period of time for them to have observed it, ignored it, and cleaned it up. So let's assume that spill happens a minute before this guest slips over it. You're going to lose that case. But if it happened, if you can show that it happened maybe 10 or 12 or 15 minutes, and there was no effort made to clean it up, there was no sign, there was no carpet, there was no nothing, better chance to show it. So essentially, the law does not recognize it. The maritime law does not recognize a duty unless they had sufficient and ample notice of the condition. That's the issue. And those things can be hard to prove, because how do you prove how long something's been there if it's not on camera, right? How do you show that if it's not on camera? Tough to do. Sometimes you can show it by, well, it's happened here repeatedly, like a swimming pool, for example, or the wreck. It's happened with such regularity that they've got to have a sign up. Okay. Those are things, but you can only get that through really laborious discovery through the cruise line, because they will fight you. They're like, well, why should you be allowed to know about that? It's got nothing to do with Marjorie falling on deck this day. It's like, oh God, it's just part of what they do. It's part of the torture that they put you through. And we have these discovery hearings in the courts, and they tell you what you're allowed to get or not get, and what objections are sustained, and so from there you hope to prove prior notice that this happened with such regularity at this location that they should be monitoring this more regularly, so guests are not slipping and sliding all over the place and breaking their arms and hips or cracking their skulls open, or that they put some signs up. And really, at the end of the day, warning signs all I need. You tell me something's wet, I'll pay attention to it. You tell me something's hot, I'll pay attention to it. Just give me a warning. That's all I'm asking for. And I think that's not too much to ask for, right? Because people don't know.
But I guess I know we talked a little bit about the prior case where the deck was really hot and it caused this extensive damage to someone that had diabetes, I believe, right?
Yes.
And then, but I know just for personally, those two things, a hot deck and also a wet pool deck, which are pretty common things, even for young people. But like you said, you had someone older that might have a disability or unknown, even an underlying disability that they don't realize, and all of a sudden something gets exasperated, right? But if they come to you and if they have a sign up, it's too bad, so sad. Is that what you're saying?
Well, yes. If they had a sign up, which, the cruise lines won't put a sign up.
Okay.
Strange as though that I can't figure this one out. Like they just won't put a warning sign up. I don't know why, but if they did put a warning sign up, then I would just tell that person who's calling him, like, what more do you want them to do? You got common sense, but they're also telling you it's hot, right? You can't at that point, there's no such thing as perfection, right? You can't sue somebody because they weren't perfect. You can sue them if they didn't exercise reasonable care. And so, okay, if they know that the decks are 40 degrees hotter than the ambient temperature, and they tell you about that, boy, that's reasonable, So then I think there would be, quote, immunity at that point if they did what was reasonable. They're not going to lose that. They're not going to lose that case, and lawyers like me wouldn't take that case, because the standard is not perfection. The standard is reasonable care, and there's many things you can do in that regard.
Yeah, so we actually have a question here.
Mm-hmm.
Joy Gray said, wow, who knew? I'm up in years, so this would definitely think twice before another cruise. What type of assurance for medical evacuation? And that's a great question, because you really have to think about it, because even on the best situations, you might not be in port where you can be evacuated, right? Or maybe your situation, just depends on what's going on, right?
Yeah. So for this, I would highly recommend if you contact your travel agent. Your travel agent is going to have a buffet of different types of trip insurance for you. And it's certainly something I would recommend to anybody that's up there in years, because you just never know. And it's so cheap. This type of insurance is so dirt cheap that, it's like, you kick yourself for not having it, and something happens. But yeah, they would, it would step in, and first off, they would help coordinate the evacuation for you. But then the second thing is all the costs are covered, right? So I would certainly suggest contacting your travel agent professional who has a lot of options in that regard.
And while we're on that note, just for the viewers and listeners here, you must hear this regularly too. Not only evacuation, but if somebody were to pass away, if the trip gets canceled, all these things can add up. Because recently I was talking to a travel agent. The matriarch of the family had this big group cruise. It happens all the time. Let's go. They're overseas, and someone breaks a bone. I think the matriarch did. And they were able to all cancel their cruise and go back because they're all together, because maybe it's her birthday or something like that, right? Mm-hmm. And everything was taken care of. But we've also talked about, and it kind of goes back when we were younger, right? What they always say, if you're getting older, what does the doctor tell you? Take a cruise. So now you're medically compromised, and you're going to go on this trip of a lifetime, but you might not come back, right? Because
yeah, I mean, I chuckle at it now, but it's I've been a part of many conversations where it's not a chuckle, unfortunately, where people have died, and it's, you don't want to. Who wants to think about, mortality? It's a morbid conversation to have, but look, no one is escaping this rock alive. I think that's the thing that, well, not, I don't think, I know that's the thing that we all have in common, right?
Right.
No one is making it out alive. We can have differences of opinion from, sun up to sun down, but we have a commonality in that. And so knowing that, we should at least have some concept that we want to protect ourselves in the event that occurs. How do we handle ourselves, or what can we do to minimize that happening? That's where I would leave it.
Yeah. And I wanted to, this came up earlier, so we're kind of circling back. What type of cases does your phone ring the most on? Like, the bulk of the phone calls that come. I know it's from talking to you offline here that it kind of covers the whole gamut. But what are the most common ones that you hear?
So, I'll give you the rundown. So a lot of it is sexual assaults. People have been assaulted by my crew member. I've had many of those types of cases. I get a lot of phone calls about medical negligence, where somebody suffered a acute issue aboard a ship and they did not get off in time, and now they're left with permanent residual complications. I get a lot of phone calls about, the run-of-the-mill slip and fall, and they broke, 4 bones, or, there's food poisoning cases. There's people who have been drastically and gravely injured on excursions. Those are the bulk of what we see on these things, John. Yeah.
I know there's more zip lines on excursions now. Almost in every port. There's also parasailing. I think you're never going to see them on a parasail. I'm just telling you, because I've heard I've seen awful videos, and it looks neat. Now I have done some crazy zip lines because they're actually pretty safe. So far, because they're new nowadays, but I don't want 10 years. I don't want to get the old one, but but and then of course these water parks, and we kind of talked about this before offline too. They've got these amazing water parks on these ships. Are those types of things, those things I just listed, are they complicating things? Are you starting to see any kind of effect of that?
Well, no, I would just say those type of events, there's risk in all of that, and so with the water parks and the water type events that we see, you're talking about things like, water in places it shouldn't be, and people slipping and falling and really hurting themselves. On excursions, excursions still to me are one of the wild cards here, because not all tour operators are created equal. There's the oversight is not there. They're not all using the latest and greatest equipment, John. I've handled, you would think, parasailing, right? I've handled probably more parasailing death cases than, I want to say, probably anybody in Florida. Unfortunately, it's like weird. You just think, do that things actually break that often? You'd be surprised. But what happens is you get set out with novice captains, or what I would call cowboys. So, no, don't worry about the wind. It's a normal day. Yet, you get a squall that comes up and damn near lifts the boat out of the water, and throws the people down with tremendous force. You see all sorts of things, but at the end of the day, you are still in people's hands. When you're doing one of those activities, you are still in people's hands. And we are all, another thing we have in common, besides we're all going to die one day, is we are all fallible. Nobody's perfect. So again, just understand that, and make your decisions accordingly. Look, I am a risk averse guy. I'll get my jollies doing other things. I don't need to do certain activities because I've seen too much of what can happen. But there are other people that are like, and they're fine. But the other people try it one time and they end up in a wheelchair the rest of their lives. So I'll stay in my seat. Thank you.
Yeah. So obviously, everybody, we've heard Tom talk about, getting injured on board. It's not so simple. There's a lot of obstacles, be it with excursions and tour buses and parasailing and zip lines and even all the things on board with the cruise lines. It's complicated, and you actually have to do so many different things from your passenger contract. You have to notify the cruise lines, and there's venue situations. So if you're ever going to have a problem, or if someone has a problem, that's why we're doing this. We're not doing it to smash. I love slam anybody. We love cruising, but it's just like anything. If you go on a boat fishing, there's a risk to everything, right? You never know. So if you do have an issue, please reach out to Tom. He's an expert with 25 years of experience. He's specialized in this. He's won amazing cases, and he knows how to guide you, just like you would go to the best doctor if you had an issue in his specialty. Reach out to him at 305-424-2300 at Scolaro Law, and it's cruiseinjury.law. And he is Tom Scolaro, and we've had this great time talking to you, Tom. Is there anything we didn't miss or we missed today, or anything you'd like to add?
I think we're good right now. I've got a lot of things ruminating in my head, but we'll share it with your audience next time.
Yeah, we hope to continue this on in the future and make this a great resource. If you haven't already, please look at our passenger contract. We did a whole hour on that as well, where we do a deep dive with Tom, where it explains all those intricacies for if you like he said earlier, if you take a cruise overseas, if you're not a U.S. citizen, all these different things, the intricacies. It's very interesting. It's different, and like I said, we're asking those tough questions. We're talking about things frankly, because luckily it might not happen to a lot of people, but the cruisers out there that actually have a problem, they need to have a resource, and they need to have a lane to go to. So I want to be your good friend and saying, hey, this is who you should call so things are taken care of properly. Because we've talked about it. The last one we did a pretty deep dive to some of the serious things that happen out there, and life-changing issues, just like anywhere else in the world, a big bad accident or car accident. But thank you so much for watching, and thank you again for taking the time to join us.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, John.
Bye-bye.